Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back several thousand years to a time when the world you know ends at the banks of the Nile, and the rhythm of your life depends entirely on how high the waters rise. The air smells faintly of mud and sweet reeds, the sky hangs low and heavy with the promise of rain that will never quite reach you, and everything feels like it's holding its breath. You're about to live through the flood season in ancient Egypt, a time both dreaded and celebrated, when the river decides whether you thrive or struggle. You probably wouldn't survive this, honestly, unless you had the instincts of a farmer who can smell change in the wind or patch a leaking roof faster than a fish can blink. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere far from the Nile, let me know in the comments where you are and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the smell. It's not unpleasant, more like wet earth mixed with the faint metallic scent of silt. The Nile is swelling, inch by inch, spilling over its banks with quiet authority. You can't see it all at once, but you can feel it. The subtle coolness under your bare feet, the distant splash of water where there shouldn't be any. Somewhere upstream, in lands you'll never visit, rains are feeding the river, pushing it toward you with slow determination. You step outside your small mud brick house and blink against the brightness. The sun glints off the water, dazzling your eyes. The old tamarisk tree near the shore has its roots half submerged now, and the first frogs are already making themselves heard, tiny, jubilant voices calling to one another in the thick morning air. Everyone around you knows what this means. The inundation has begun. It's not sudden or violent, it's a creeping miracle. You've been waiting for it nervously ever since the first whispers from the southern villages arrived. Too much water means disaster, too little means famine. But the right amount, that's the difference between despair and abundance. You look toward the horizon, where the fields used to be, now slowly vanishing under the rising tide. It's strange, watching your world dissolve. The furrows you helped plow a few weeks ago are gone. The borders of your neighbor's land are gone. Even the footpath to the temple is just a faint ripple under the murky surface. Still, no one panics. This is how life works here. You and your neighbors move like ants, steady and resigned, stacking baskets, carrying livestock to higher ground, sealing storage jars with clay. You hear a woman laughing as she balances a squawking goose under her arm, her sandals slapping against the damp earth. Children chase each other with handfuls of reeds, shrieking in delight as the water licks at their toes. The elders, though, watch quietly. They've seen floods that took too much, leaving only ruin in their wake. They know how fragile the balance can be. There's an old saying, "The Nile gives and the Nile takes away," sometimes in the same breath. By noon, the sound of the river has changed. It's no longer a distant murmur, but a steady, living pulse that seems to echo in your chest. You sit near the edge, watching bits of straw and drifting lotus petals swirl in slow spirals. Every few moments, a piece of driftwood floats by, a reminder that the flood carries not only life, but everything that once stood in its path. Across the water, you spot a figure waving, a friend from the other bank, his voice lost in the distance. He's standing where his yard used to be, now surrounded by ankle-deep water. You wave back, both of you smiling at the absurdity of it. In a few days, he'll probably need a boat to visit you. The priests in town have already begun their rituals. You can hear the faint rhythm of drums carried by the wind. They'll offer prayers to Hapi, the god of the Nile, the one who embodies this flood. You imagine the temple courtyard filled with garlands of lotus flowers, the air thick with incense. Someone told you once that the priests claimed to read the river's mind by watching the patterns of bubbles and foam. You're not sure if that's true, but it sounds like something they'd say. There's a strange comfort in knowing the flood connects everyone. The pharaoh, the farmer, the fisherman, they all depend on this same water. The royal scribes in Memphis will soon record the height of the river on the Nilometer, carved deep into stone. They'll compare it to last year's marks, predicting whether Egypt will feast or starve. Historians still argue whether those measurements were purely practical or partly ceremonial, whether the priests fudged the numbers to please the pharaoh or genuinely believed the gods would take offense if they told the truth. You squat by the water's edge and scoop up a handful of mud. It's thick, cold, and black as ink. You rub it between your fingers, imagining it drying into the bricks of new homes, the pots that will hold next year's grain, the walls of tombs that might outlast the flood, and you. The mud is more than dirt here. It's the foundation of everything. Somewhere nearby, someone shouts, a laugh, not alarm. A young man has stepped too far into the water and lost his sandal to the current. You can see it bobbing away like a tiny brown boat, too swift to chase. Everyone chuckles. Losing one sandal during flood season is almost a rite of passage. By late afternoon, the world has turned gold. The sun dips low, reflecting off the water like liquid metal. You find yourself growing quieter, your movements slower. Even the animals seem to sense the shift. The donkeys stop braying. The air fills with the faint rustle of reeds swaying in the gentle breeze. You sit on a low wall, watching the horizon blur. It's impossible to tell where the river ends and the sky begins. The whole world feels soft-edged, drowsy, like a dream. Maybe that's why people here rarely fear the flood outright. It feels too ancient, too inevitable to fight. You remember the old tales your grandmother told you about when the river refused to rise for 7 long years, when the fields cracked and people traded jewelry for a single jar of barley. And then the opposite story, the year the flood came so high it swallowed entire villages, leaving only the tops of palm trees visible above the endless water. Both times, they said, the people prayed to Hapi, and eventually the balance returned. You stretch your legs, letting your toes brush the water. The river is still rising. By morning, it'll have crept farther inland, maybe reaching the granary wall. You should feel worried, but instead, you just feel calm. There's something soothing about surrendering to something bigger than yourself. You glance up at the stars beginning to flicker overhead. The same stars the pharaoh's astronomers chart in their tall towers, believing they can read the river's future in the constellations. You smile at the thought. If they could see you now, a tired farmer sitting barefoot beside the flood, they might note your position too, a small dot of humanity floating peacefully on the edge of chaos. Somewhere in the distance, a heron takes off, its wings beating slow and heavy against the dusk. You watch it rise until it's just a shadow against the fading light. The sound of the water keeps time with your heartbeat, steady, ancient, and kind. The flood is here. The world is underwater. And for now, you belong entirely to the Nile. Morning arrives in a soft gray haze. The air feels heavier than usual, thick with moisture and the faint scent of lotus flowers carried from somewhere upriver. You step outside and squint toward the horizon. The Nile has crept even closer overnight. The boundary between land and water has blurred into a silver mirror that catches the first pale light of dawn. The world looks new again, or maybe ancient, as if time itself has flooded too. You hear voices calling from the riverbank, familiar ones. The priests and scribes have gathered near the Nilometer, the sacred measuring shaft that juts from the stone embankment. It's an old structure, carved deep into the earth, its sides marked with cubit lines to record the Nile's mood. You decide to go. curious like everyone else. After all, how high the water climbs will shape the year ahead. Taxes, harvests, even marriages might hinge on what they find. The ground squelches under your feet as you make your way down the muddy path. Reeds brush against your legs, whispering secrets as you pass. The air hums with insects, their droning softened by distance. It's the sound of a living landscape, a river not just filling space, but commanding it. When you reach the gathering, a small crowd has already formed. People lean forward, shading their eyes, as a priest in white linen kneels beside the shaft, lowering a wooden rod marked with fine etchings. The rod disappears into the dark water with a quiet plunk. Everyone holds their breath. You catch snippets of murmured prayers. Someone invokes Hoppy's name. Another mutters something about last year's low reading. The priest lifts the rod again, wet halfway up its length. He examines it carefully, then turns to the chief scribe, who's holding a scroll of fresh papyrus. "It rises well," the priest says, his voice calm but carrying that quiet note of relief. 5 cubits above last year. A wave of soft chatter ripples through the crowd. That's good news, better than good. It means the flood will likely reach the perfect level, high enough to nourish, low enough to spare. People exchange glances that carry the unspoken language of shared survival. The scribe dips his reed pen in ink and records the number, steady and practiced. His expression never changes, though you wonder if he too feels a flicker of hope. The bureaucratic face of faith, that's what you think. The priest speaks to the gods, but the scribe speaks to the future. As the ritual continues, incense drifts across the water, mingling with the smell of wet clay and riverweed. The priests chant praises to Hoppy, describing him as the one who makes the fields green, who fills the storehouses, who brings joy to the heart of men. You mouth the words softly under your breath. It feels right to thank the river, even if you don't know who or what is listening. Historians still argue whether the Nilometer readings were real or just what the priests wanted the pharaoh to hear. You raise an eyebrow. He grins. My uncle says the priests sometimes lied to keep people calm. You chuckle quietly. Maybe your uncle's right, but if the gods catch them lying, they'll flood the whole temple next year. He laughs, then runs off toward the water, tossing pebbles and watching the ripples spread. It's hard to take divine bureaucracy too seriously when you're surrounded by so much quiet beauty. The ceremony ends, and people begin to drift away. Some linger to scoop water into jars, murmuring blessings over it before carrying it home. You stay a little longer, watching the sunlight shimmer on the surface. The water level glints against the stone like a secret code. You can almost imagine the Nile speaking, a slow, ancient voice saying, "Not yet. Wait a little longer." By mid-morning, the village hums with cautious optimism. Farmers stand at their thresholds, hands on hips, gazing across the submerged fields. Children chase floating reeds, pretending they're boats bound for faraway lands. The air is full of that strange mix of waiting and gratitude, the kind that comes only once a year when life presses pause. At the edge of the settlement, the temple bell rings, a deep, echoing tone that carries for miles. It calls for another offering, a symbolic thank you to the river's spirit. You follow the sound, though not because you're especially pious. It's simply what everyone does during the flood. The temple sits on slightly higher ground, its steps flanked by carved lions whose faces have softened with age. The priests are already inside, placing baskets of figs, bread, and flowers before a painted image of Hoppy. The god's round belly and serene smile seem to mirror the river itself, generous, calm, unpredictable. You watch as one of the younger priests pours a jug of Nile water into a stone basin, letting it overflow. The symbolism isn't subtle. When your turn comes, you set down your own small offering, a few dates from last season, slightly shriveled but sweet. You whisper a quick prayer for steady waters and good health. A little superstition never hurts. As you step back outside, the sunlight is brighter now, almost white. You shade your eyes and look across the glimmering floodplain. The landscape seems endless, like a sea punctuated by palm tops and the roofs of distant houses. Somewhere beneath all that water lies your field, your tools, your work. Yet, somehow, it doesn't feel like loss. It feels like trust. You make your way home, the sound of water following you everywhere. Occasionally, you pass neighbors carrying messages or goods balanced on wooden trays. The path between houses has become a network of narrow, slippery ridges. Soon, it will vanish entirely, replaced by boats. When you reach your house, you pause to look back at the river. For a moment, it seems alive, breathing slowly, the surface pulsing with gentle ripples. It's easy to see why people here call it the giver of life. Without it, this land would be nothing but dust and stone. Inside, your family is already preparing for the waiting season. Your mother sits cross-legged, weaving new mats from palm fibers. Your father checks the granary seals, ensuring no moisture gets in. The cat has claimed a basket by the window, curled in a perfect spiral of sleep. You join them, though your thoughts keep wandering back to the riverbank. You can still hear the priests chanting in your head, rhythmic and soothing. Maybe that's why people have always relied on ritual, to make the uncontrollable feel just a little more predictable. That night, the sky turns deep indigo, and the moon reflects off the flooded plains like scattered silver coins. The frogs sing again, joined by the occasional splash of something unseen. You sit on the roof, the air cool against your skin. In the distance, you can make out faint torchlight near the nilometer. Perhaps the scribes are double-checking the readings, or maybe they just like to watch the river glow in the moonlight. You breathe in deeply, the smell of wet reeds and clay grounding you in the present. This is what life beside the Nile is: a rhythm, a cycle, a trust exercise with the universe. You can't control the river, you can only listen to it. You close your eyes and imagine the flood's path, the water flowing from faraway rains in Ethiopia, winding through deserts, feeding the delta, and finally reaching the sea. You're just a small note in that endless song, one voice in a chorus that's been singing for thousands of years. Somewhere nearby, an old man hums an ancient tune, his voice blending with the sounds of the night. You don't know the words, but you recognize the meaning: gratitude, awe, surrender. The flood has spoken, and for now, it speaks kindly. The next morning greets you with the faint scent of drying mud and smoke from cooking fires. The world outside glows in muted tones: browns, grays, and the soft silver of water under cloud-filtered sunlight. You can hear the river still breathing around your village, lapping at doorsteps and fences, but for now, the water seems content to stay where it is. The worst of the rising is over. It has found its level, like a cat curling into the perfect shape before sleep. You step out of your mud brick home, and your bare feet sink slightly into the damp ground. The walls are darkened with moisture, streaked with the faint patterns of last night's drizzle. The house has stood through many floods before, but that doesn't mean it's invincible. You run your hand along the outer wall, feeling the cool clay beneath your fingers. It's sturdy, though a few small cracks have reappeared near the corners, like wrinkles on an old, wise face. Your home sits on a low rise, just high enough to stay dry when the Nile is in a generous mood. You built it that way, or rather your parents did, years ago, piling basket after basket of earth until the mound was firm and high. Some families weren't as lucky, or perhaps not as cautious. Down by the old road, you can see a neighbor's courtyard half submerged, the tops of clay jars floating lazily where herbs once grew. A goat bleats from a rooftop, utterly unimpressed by the situation. You grab a small trowel and start patching the cracks in the wall. The mix of fresh mud and straw squishes pleasantly between your fingers. The sound of distant laughter drifts through the humid air. Someone's children, likely splashing around where the path used to be. Flood season may pause the farming, but it doesn't pause life. If anything, it gives people more time to notice things. The texture of water, the smell of baking bread, the way the light changes hour by hour. Inside, the house feels cool and dim. The roof is low, supported by rough wooden beams, and the floor is covered in woven mats. A small clay lamp flickers near the wall niche where you keep a statue of Bess, the squat, bearded household god who's supposed to keep away snakes, bad dreams, and unwanted in-laws. You mutter a greeting to him as you pass, because, well, it never hurts. Your mother hums quietly as she kneads dough on a low table. The smell of yeast and barley fills the air. "The water rose high," she says without looking up, but not too high. You nod, glancing out the doorway again. The nilometer showed a good reading. She grins. "Then the gods are pleased. Maybe they won't send locusts this time." You both laugh softly. It's a tired joke, but it feels good to make it anyway. There's comfort in repeating the same small hopes every year. By midday, the sun has burned through the haze, and the water outside gleams like polished bronze. You take a break from repairs and climb onto the flat roof. From up here, the world looks like a watercolor painting. Patches of green palms and brown rooftops floating in a field of shimmering blue. Distant smoke curls lazily upward from other villages. You can almost imagine the Nile stretching all the way to the sky, one endless mirror of light and movement. Across the way, your neighbor Seneb waves from his roof. He's got his youngest daughter perched beside him, her feet kicking at the air. "You ready for a long season of sitting and waiting?" he calls. You shrug with a grin. "Depends how long my beer supply lasts." He laughs, "Then may the gods shorten the flood for your sake." The joke carries easily across the still water. You wave back, then settle on the roof's edge, feeling the warmth of sun-baked clay beneath your palms. There's a gentle breeze, rare this time of year, that smells faintly of silt and flowers. For a moment, everything feels suspended in time. Below you, your father checks the reed fencing that keeps stray animals out of the house yard. The fence wobbles, half soaked and leaning, but it'll hold. You remember how he used to tell you that building in Egypt means building with time itself, that the same mud you step on today could have once formed a pharaoh's palace wall, only to crumble back into the river centuries later. "The Nile borrows everything," he'd say. "Even us." That thought lingers in your mind as you climb back down. Inside, your mother's bread is baking in the clay oven. The smell is rich and earthy, and your stomach growls in appreciation. You tear off a piece when it's done, careful not to burn your fingers, and let the warmth fill your chest. It tastes faintly smoky, slightly sour, and perfect. Later, as afternoon slips into gold, you take a slow walk around the edge of the village. Every sound seems amplified. The splash of a fish, the rustle of reeds, the distant creak of wooden shutters. The flood has created a strange quietness, as though the whole world is whispering. You pass a group of men stacking bricks near a newly built dike. The bricks are drying in the sun, still damp and glistening. One of them waves you over, holding up a half-formed brick and grinning. "Crocodile dung," he says proudly. "Makes them stronger." You raise an eyebrow. Stronger or just smellier? He laughs, tossing the brick into the stack. Historians still argue whether that trick actually worked, he says mock seriously, mimicking the tone of a scribe. You both chuckle, though the smell soon drives you back toward cleaner air. The path winds past an abandoned granary, its door tied shut with rope. You remember how full it was last season, stacked high with golden barley. Now, with the fields underwater, the building stands empty and quiet. You place a hand on its wall, feeling the faint warmth of stored sunlight still trapped in the clay. Everything here is built to wait, to endure. By evening, the colors of the world deepen again. The river turns copper, then rose, then deep violet as the sun dips behind the palms. Smoke from cooking fires drifts lazily upward, mingling with the scent of roasted fish and onions. You carry a clay jar to the water's edge, kneel, and fill it carefully. Tiny ripples spread out from your hands, catching the last light of the day. You pause, watching your reflection shimmer in the current. For a moment, you think you see something else beside it, a faint image of a carved face, serene and smiling. Maybe it's just the play of light, or maybe it's Hoppy himself, keeping watch. Either way, you murmur a quiet thanks. As darkness settles, you retreat inside. The frogs begin their nightly chorus, 1,000 tiny throats singing the same sleepy rhythm. You light a small lamp, its flame flickering gently in the draft. The walls glow soft amber, the shadows long and slow moving. You sit cross-legged on the mat, eating your bread and beans, and think about the strange comfort of this season. Yes, the flood pauses everything, the work, the harvest, the routine, but it also gives something rare, time. Time to mend, to rest, to remember. Outside, the Nile murmurs softly against the shore. It's hard to tell if it's rising still or beginning to fall. But you don't mind. You've done your part. The house stands firm, the roof is patched, and your heart feels steady. You stretch out on your mat and close your eyes. The air smells faintly of baked earth and river wind. Somewhere, a dog barks, distant and small. And then, just before sleep takes you, you think, this flood is not just water. It's memory, history, and life itself, flowing past and through and over you. The next morning begins in a half-light that turns everything silver and soft. You wake to the sound of water brushing against the edge of your home's earthen rise, like a cat's paw against fabric, steady, patient, impossible to ignore. The air smells of riverweed and something faintly sweet, perhaps the first lotus blooms opening somewhere nearby. You stretch, step outside, and listen. The world has changed again overnight. The floodplain now stretches farther, swallowing paths and low trees. A papyrus boat glides past silently, steered by a fisherman whose oar dips into the water with a rhythm that feels ancient and familiar. His silhouette cuts through the mist, and for a moment, he looks like one of the painted figures on temple walls, frozen mid-row for eternity. You sit on the low stone by your doorway, toes brushing damp earth, and close your eyes. The sounds of the river fill your head, the croak of frogs, the faint buzz of insects, the slow slap of waves against wood. It's music, messy, alive, never quite repeating. Someone nearby calls your name. It's old Nabia, the herb woman, her gray hair tied in a scarf the color of clay. She's balancing a basket on her head, filled with bundles of dried papyrus stems. "You hear him last night?" she asks with a grin. You blink. Hear who? "Hoppy," she says, pointing to the water. "The river god. He was laughing again. Big storm upriver means good harvest." You chuckle, not sure whether to humor her or agree. "If he's laughing, I hope it's not at us." She snorts, adjusts her basket, and wades off toward higher ground. Her words linger though. Hapi, the Nile god, blue-skinned, belly full and smiling, the bringer of life, and sometimes, just for fun, mild chaos. You remember the stories you've heard since childhood. The old men tell them by firelight when the flood traps everyone indoors. Hapi lives deep beneath the river, they say, surrounded by fish that sing and crocodiles that dance. Though, to be fair, historians still argue whether crocodiles are capable of anything resembling dancing. Each year, when the rains fall in the south, he rises from his hidden chambers to breathe life into Egypt, swelling the river's heart until it spills over the land. Some believe he carries the silt himself in his great hands, scattering it like a baker with flour. Others whisper that his laughter shakes the ground and cracks open the clouds. You stand and walk closer to the water, half smiling at the thought. If Hapi truly is down there, he's got a fine sense of timing. The flood has been kind this year. The air feels full of quiet gratitude. Across the river, a small group of boys shout and splash near the reeds, their laughter echoing off the water. One of them has found a long stick and is poking at something floating, a clump of weeds maybe. "Careful," you call out lazily. The river bites back. They laugh harder. "Only if you're tasty," one shouts, and the others dissolve into giggles. You shake your head, smiling. The Nile has that effect. It makes everyone, even the cautious, a little bold. A little later, you find yourself sitting under a palm, watching the world drift by. The frogs are louder now, joined by the rhythmic chirp of water birds. Somewhere behind you, someone beats laundry against a rock, the wet slap punctuating the river's steady hum. You breathe deeply, and the scent of damp earth fills your lungs. Then, faintly, you hear it. Music. At first, it's just a low drone, almost like the sound of the wind through reeds. But as you listen, it takes shape, a melody played on a double flute, soft and slow. You follow the sound until you find its source. A young man sitting in a small boat tied to a tree trunk, his feet dangling over the edge. He's playing for no one in particular, eyes half closed, letting the music float across the water. You sit on the bank nearby and watch. The notes curl through the air, weaving around the rustle of leaves and the murmur of the current. It's hauntingly beautiful, and just for a moment, you imagine the river listening too. The musician pauses, looks up, and grins. You like it? You nod. The Nile seems to. He laughs, tucking the flute under his arm. My father says Hapi loves songs, especially lazy ones. You smile back. Then you're giving him exactly what he wants. He shrugs, looking out over the water. We all have to, don't we? The simplicity of that thought stays with you long after he rows away. You wander along the bank, letting your fingers skim the water's surface. The Nile is warm, almost silky. Beneath it, you imagine hidden currents swirling, ancient and alive. Later that afternoon, you join a small gathering near the village square. The local storyteller has set up his stool beneath a sycamore tree, surrounded by children and a few adults who pretend not to care but linger anyway. He's a thin man with a booming voice and eyes that sparkle like he's perpetually in on a secret. Long ago, he begins, the Nile was not so generous. His hands move dramatically. There was a year when it refused to rise. The priests prayed, the farmers wept, and the pharaoh consulted every scroll in his palace, but nothing helped. So a young fisherman, clever and foolish in equal measure, decided to dive into the river and find Hapi himself. The children gasp on cue. The storyteller continues, leaning closer, lowering his voice. He swam deeper and deeper, past silver fish and sleeping crocodiles, until he reached the river's heart, a cave of blue light and whispering water. And there he saw Hoppy laughing as he poured water into the wrong channels by mistake. Everyone chuckles. The storyteller winks. The fisherman scolded him. Imagine that, telling a god he was clumsy. But Hoppy only laughed harder, clapping his great hands. And then, the next morning, the Nile rose higher than ever before, so high that the fisherman had to build a boat to get home again. Laughter ripples through the crowd. You find yourself smiling too. It's not the story itself that matters. It's the ritual of telling, the comfort of hearing familiar absurdities in uncertain times. As dusk falls, you walk home slowly, the echo of the flute and the storyteller's voice still drifting in your mind. Firelight flickers from open doorways, painting golden reflections on the dark water. Somewhere, someone sings a slow work song, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. You pause by the edge of the river, watching the reflection of the moon tremble on the ripples. The air feels thick, like honey, and the chorus of frogs grows louder, as if joining in a hymn. The Nile glows faintly under the starlight, a ribbon of moving silver cutting through the darkness. You whisper, almost without realizing it, "Good night, Hoppy." A faint breeze stirs the water in reply, or maybe it's just coincidence. Either way, it feels like an answer. Inside, your family is already asleep. You lie down on your mat and listen to the faint sounds outside. The croak of frogs, the whisper of wind through papyrus, the far-off hum of voices still telling stories. The river is never truly silent. It speaks in endless murmurs, reminding you that even stillness here is alive. As your eyelids grow heavy, one last thought drifts through your mind. The Nile is not just water. It's a voice, a patient, eternal storyteller. And tonight, it's still talking to you. The next morning dawns pale and hazy, as though the world itself hasn't quite decided whether to wake up. The mist rises from the Nile in long, soft ribbons, curling around the reeds and drifting lazily through the palms. The air is cool, rare and precious this time of year, and carries the faint sweetness of damp soil mixed with the scent of fresh-cut grain. You sit outside with a small clay cup of barley drink, watching as the mist begins to dissolve into sunlight. Across the water, the first fishermen are already pushing off from shore, their narrow boats gliding soundlessly through the slow current. The surface gleams gold where the sun touches it. You can see the ripples trail behind each oar like threads in a great loom. There's a certain rhythm to life by the Nile, one that everyone seems to know by heart. The river gives, the people respond. The waters rise and fall, and so does the pulse of every day. Today, that pulse carries a quiet excitement. The planting season is about to begin. You join the others down by the riverbank, where the fields, now thick with dark silt, stretch in broad patches along the edge of the floodplain. The men have already started to clear the leftover weeds, while the women work alongside them, scattering handfuls of seed from woven baskets. Bare feet sink into the damp earth, leaving slow, deliberate footprints. The smell of the soil is heavy and rich, like the promise of something new. A group of oxen plod steadily in a circle, pulling simple wooden plows that cut shallow furrows in the mud. Their hides glisten with moisture. Every snort and shuffle seems to add to the slow, steady rhythm of the morning. You fall into step beside one of the planters, a boy no older than 15, laughing as he tosses the seeds with a practiced flick of the wrist. "It feels like the river's still breathing," he says, tossing another handful into the breeze. "You can feel it under your feet." You nod. The ground's still soft from the flood. It's a good sign. He grins, wiping sweat from his brow. The priests say Hoppy's happy this year. And if he's not, you tease? The boy shrugs with mock seriousness. Then we plant twice as fast. You laugh, and he grins wider, moving down the row. By midday, the sun has burned away the last of the mist. The air grows warm and shimmering, the kind of heat that makes even shadows seem to slow down. You sit beneath a tamarisk tree, watching the workers move like steady clockwork through the fields. The hum of their voices mixes with the low buzz of insects and the distant croak of herons in the shallows. Someone nearby hums an old farming song, soft, rhythmic, older than memory. It's a tune without words, just a gentle rise and fall, echoing the flow of the river itself. You find yourself tapping a finger in time. Later, a procession appears on the horizon, a line of people in simple linen robes carrying small clay jars and palm branches. At their head walks a priest in spotless white, his shaven head glinting in the sunlight. You recognize the ritual instantly, a blessing for the land. The workers stop and bow their heads as the group passes, scattering drops of water mixed with natron and lotus oil across the soil. The priest murmurs a prayer in a slow, melodic chant. May Hapi fill the furrows. May the black earth drink deeply. May the grain rise tall as the palm, and the hearts of the people rest easy. The words drift through the air like smoke, ancient and calm. Even the oxen seem to pause for a moment, as though listening. You close your eyes and breathe it in. The world feels utterly still, like the pause between a heartbeat and its echo. When the ceremony ends, the workers return to their tasks, but their movements seem lighter now, almost joyful. The boy from earlier passes by again, splattered with mud, but grinning. See, he says, gesturing at the sky. He heard us. You look up. A faint breeze has begun to stir, rustling the tall reeds and rippling across the river's surface. Whether divine or coincidence, it feels like an answer. As the day wears on, the village hums with quiet industry. The potters sit beneath shaded awnings, shaping clay jars to hold next season's grain. Their hands move quickly, expertly, turning the wheel with their feet as the vessels rise from the spinning mass like something summoned from memory. Children chase each other between the drying racks, laughing as they weave around half-finished pots. Nearby, an elderly woman kneels beside a low fire, heating water in a small bronze pot. The smell of boiled herbs drifts through the air. She catches your eye and gestures you over. "Sit," she says kindly. "You look like you've been listening to the sun all day." You laugh and lower yourself to the ground. "I was hoping it might tell me something." She smiles, stirring the pot. "The sun doesn't talk much. The river does all the talking here." You nod in agreement. She pours you a small cup of the steaming drink, sweetened barley with a hint of mint. The warmth seeps through your hands, grounding and familiar. As the afternoon fades into gold, you walk once more to the river's edge. The fishermen are returning, their nets glinting with flashes of silver. The water swells gently against the shore, and you can see faint trails of boats farther upstream, tiny black silhouettes against the setting sun. You think of how much this river carries, not just water, but stories. Each bend, each eddy, each slow whirl seems to hold memory. People come and go, generations rise and fall, but the Nile keeps moving, whispering the same soft secrets to anyone willing to listen. You kneel and dip your fingers into the current. It's cooler now, sliding over your skin like silk. You can feel the faint tug of the water, a reminder that it is always going somewhere, even when it looks still. As twilight deepens, the horizon turns the color of burnished copper, The first stars flicker awake above the palms. The voices from the fields fade into the hum of night. The gentle croak of frogs, the chirp of crickets, the whisper of wind through reeds. You stand and watch as the river mirrors the stars, reflecting a sky so vast it feels endless. Somewhere far off, someone begins to sing again, a low lullaby for the evening, maybe for the river itself. The words drift faintly across the water, carried by the wind. Flow, my gentle Nile, through field and dream and time. Carry our stories on your smile, and make tomorrow kind. You find yourself mouthing the words, though you've never heard them before. The song feels timeless, like something you were always meant to remember. By the time you return home, the lamps are lit. Your family sits quietly around a small meal, lentils, onions, a few strips of dried fish. The conversation is soft and unhurried. Outside, the river murmurs against the shore, the eternal companion of every Egyptian dream. You lie down later, the sound of the water seeping into your thoughts again. Each wave feels like a page turning in some endless book. You think about the silt, the seeds, the laughter of the workers, the priest's chant, and the song that drifted through the dusk. Everything circles back to the same rhythm, the river's rhythm. And as your eyes grow heavy, you realize something simple but profound. The Nile doesn't just feed the land, it feeds the imagination too. Every ripple holds a reflection of human hope, quiet and eternal. You drift to sleep with that thought, the soft murmur of the river whispering you into dreams. The sun hasn't yet broken over the horizon, but the Nile already glows with the faint light of dawn. The air carries that unmistakable scent, mud, reeds, and cool water mingled with a touch of smoke from distant hearths. It's the kind of morning where the world feels half asleep, caught between dreaming and waking. You stretch, your joints creaking slightly, and listen to the quiet lap of water against the bank. This is the season when boats rule everything. The fields still glisten with lingering pools. The roads have turned to deep ruts of mud, and the only sensible way to move from one house to another is boat. Everyone becomes a navigator of small rivers that didn't exist a month ago. You step into your own papyrus skiff, its edges patched with fresh reeds and coated in pitch that still smells faintly like smoke. It's light, fragile even, yet sturdy enough to bear your weight as you push away from the bank. The water parts smoothly beneath you, and you feel that first familiar thrill, being carried by the river, gliding through reflections of palm trees and sky. The paddle moves easily in your hands. You've done this all your life, but it still feels like magic, riding above what used to be dry earth, your path guided only by the gentle current and the faint ripples of fish darting below. You're not alone on the water. Dozens of other boats drift nearby, moving between clusters of homes and half-submerged storehouses. Some carry sacks of grain, others people heading to neighboring villages. You nod to an old man ferrying baskets of onions. He nods back, his paddle dipping into the water in slow, meditative rhythm. From one boat, a group of children laugh and splash each other, their voices carrying clear across the water. One of them waves a small wooden toy boat, letting it float beside them like a companion fleet. You can't help smiling. The Nile might be a god to the priests, a measurement to the scribes, but to the children, it's a playground. As you paddle onward, you pass a group of fishermen casting wide nets. The cords fan out across the surface, glinting in the early light before sinking just beneath. One man calls out that he's seen the silver flash of mullet already this morning. Another claims he caught a turtle as big as a stool yesterday. You wave, and they shout an invitation to join them, but you shake your head. You've got errands first. Your task today is simple but vital: Deliver a small jar of honey and a bundle of dried fish to your cousin on the opposite bank. Normally, it would be a short walk. Now, it's an expedition through a temporary world of water. You paddle around a bend where the flooded fields open into a broad, shimmering expanse. The reflection of the sky stretches endlessly, broken only by clusters of reeds poking through the surface. A pair of egrets stand motionless in the shallows, perfectly still except for the slow tilt of their long necks. Somewhere far off, a cow bellows from a raft made of bound logs, a farmer's way of keeping livestock safe until the land reappears. The sound echoes softly, as though the world itself were hollow and listening. You reach a cluster of homes built on slightly higher mounds of earth. The walls, baked from mud brick, are streaked with water stains from the flood's peak. But the rooftops are dry now, and women sit there weaving baskets or airing mats in the gentle breeze. Your cousin's house stands near the edge. You tie your boat to a reed post and climb up carefully, feet squelching in the soft soil. She greets you with a grin that's half amusement, half disbelief. "You came by river mail?" she teases. You hand her the honey jar and fish bundle. "Delivery service of the Nile, fast and free, but bring your own boat." She laughs, taking the gifts. Inside her home, the air is warm and smells faintly of lentil stew. Her youngest child toddles over to inspect your paddle, fascinated by the traces of river mud clinging to it. "Boat!" he declares proudly. You stay for a little while, sharing a small breakfast. Flatbread, dates, and a drink sweetened with fermented barley. The conversation drifts lazily, from family news to speculation about how much longer the water will last. "Maybe another month," she says, glancing out toward the glimmering floodplain. "If the priest's readings are right." You nod. "Historians still argue whether they ever truly knew when it would stop," you say with a wry smile. "Maybe even the gods kept guessing." She chuckles. "Then I suppose guessing is divine work." When you leave, the sun has climbed higher, turning the river to a sheet of liquid bronze. You push off again, the paddle dipping rhythmically into the water. The current feels stronger now, tugging gently at the boat's side, as if urging you downstream. You drift for a while, letting the river steer you. It's easy to lose track of time like this. No roads, no landmarks, only the endless movement of water and sky. A cool breeze brushes your face, carrying the scent of lotus flowers blooming in quiet corners. You pass under a line of trees whose branches bend low, trailing their leaves across the surface. The gentle swish of water against the hull becomes almost hypnotic. It's the kind of calm that makes you forget to think. A dragonfly lands briefly on your knee, its wings shimmering like tiny panes of glass. For a moment, everything feels suspended, the world holding its breath between one heartbeat and the next. "Mind the current there! It's deeper than it looks!" You glance back to see a fisherman waving, his net balanced over his shoulder. You wave your thanks and steer slightly left. The water indeed darkens there, swirling in slow eddies. You think about how deceptively quiet the Nile can be, how much power lies beneath that surface calm. Some say the river has moods. One of your uncles swore he could tell when it was thinking, as though the Nile decided its own course, ignoring the efforts of men entirely. You smile at the memory. By midday, you stop at a small patch of high ground dotted with papyrus plants and low shrubs. You tie up the boat and stretch your legs, sitting for a while to eat a piece of bread and some figs. The heat presses gently against your back, but the breeze from the water keeps it bearable. As you chew, you spot movement on the far bank, two priests walking along the water's edge, carrying what looks like a bundle wrapped in linen. You squint and realize it's a small effigy, likely an offering to Happy. They set it afloat and bow low as the current carries it away. The sight fills you with quiet awe. Even now, with all your familiarity with the river, it still feels alive, something vast and listening. You wonder how many prayers it's heard, how many promises whispered into its depths. When you push off again, the shadows are longer. The air has cooled just slightly, and the surface of the Nile begins to mirror the pink and gold streaks of the sunset. Birds skim low over the water, their wings brushing the surface in fleeting arcs. A family in another boat passes by, their laughter soft in the evening air. A boy at the bow waves a branch decorated with shells, calling it his sailor's charm. His mother shakes her head affectionately. He thinks it keeps the crocodiles away, she explains with a wink. You grin. Let's hope it works for all of us. As you paddle the last stretch home, the river grows quieter. The sounds of the day fade, tools clinking, voices calling, animals stirring, and the world slips into that hush before night truly arrives. The only sound now is the soft dip of your paddle and the whisper of ripples behind you. By the time you reach your own bank, the moon has risen, casting a silver sheen across the floodplain. You secure the boat, watching as it rocks gently against its tether, and take a deep breath of the cool night air. For a moment, you stand there, listening. The Nile murmurs softly, steady, endless, comforting. You think about all the people drifting home in their little boats, lanterns glowing like stars upon the water. Each one a tiny moving world, all part of this great breathing rhythm. You smile to yourself. Life beside the Nile is never still, but somehow it always feels at peace. You turn toward home, your footsteps slow, the sound of the river following you like a lullaby. Morning comes softly again, the light creeping over the Nile like a slow exhale. The air smells of wet reeds and sun-warmed clay. You wake to the sound of distant splashes, a rhythm you've come to recognize not as danger, but as life returning in its many forms. The flood season doesn't belong to humans alone. The animals thrive here too, claiming their share of the river's gifts. When you step outside, the horizon seems alive. A white heron takes off in silence, wings slicing through the pink dawn. Nearby, a cluster of ibis wade gracefully through the shallows, their curved beaks probing for snails. They move like dancers, measured, solemn, as if performing a ritual known only to them. You walk toward the edge of the water, the ground still slick beneath your feet. The sound of frogs chirping rises in waves, so loud and insistent it almost feels like a chant. A few toads have taken refuge in the shade of your home's mud brick wall, croaking indignantly as you pass. You can't help but grin, tiny guardians of the flood. Just beyond the reeds, movement catches your eye. Two small heads peek above the surface, eyes glinting like polished stones. Crocodiles. You freeze for a moment, heart giving a single strong beat. They float there perfectly still, as though carved from greenish-brown stone. Only the occasional flick of a tail betraying life. You know better than to move too quickly. The people here have a complicated relationship with those creatures, half terror, half reverence. After all, Sobek himself, the crocodile god, is said to embody both the Nile's danger and its protection. You whisper a quick greeting under your breath, a small act of respect that couldn't hurt. Stay full, old friend, you murmur quietly, and stay far. The crocodiles blink once, lazily, and drift away down the current, their ridged backs slicing the surface like shadows. As the sun climbs higher, you decide to take your small boat again, this time not to deliver anything, but simply to explore. During flood season, the land transforms so completely that even the most familiar paths become strange and dreamlike. Trees appear to grow straight out of the water. Rooftops peak like islands from the distance. And the usual smells of dust and grain are replaced by cool river scent. You push off gently, the boat rocking beneath you. The water glitters as if sprinkled with 1,000 tiny mirrors. Each stroke of the paddle brings a faint swirl of silt up from below, clouding the otherwise clear surface. A fish jumps suddenly to your right, then another and another. You laugh out loud as one nearly lands in the boat, its scales flashing in the sunlight before it disappears again with a plop. Maybe your neighbor wasn't exaggerating after all when he claimed fish sometimes leap into storage pots. Drifting farther along the flooded plain, you see signs of other creatures claiming their temporary kingdom. A family of hippos basks near a clump of lotus, half submerged, their enormous heads bobbing lazily as they grunt to each other. One opens its mouth in a yawn so wide you could almost see the morning reflected in it. The sound carries a deep, rumbling snort that vibrates across the water like distant thunder. You keep your distance. Everyone knows to. The hippos might look slow and drowsy, but stories circulate of boats upended, paddlers sent scrambling for their lives. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly feared them or simply respected them as part of the Nile's natural order. But if you had to choose between respect and getting flattened, you'd pick respect every time. Farther downstream, you come across a patch of reeds rustling more than usual. You pause your paddling, listening. A faint squeak, then another. You lean slightly closer and spot a family of river rats scrambling up a stalk, their fur sleek with water. They move quickly, efficient survivors of flood and drought alike. One pauses to sniff the air, whiskers twitching, before darting off. You smile. The Nile, it seems, has room for everyone, from kings to crocodiles, from priests to mice. The midday sun grows strong, turning the water to molten gold. You guide your boat into the shade of an overhanging acacia tree, its branches heavy with seed pods. The air hums with insects. You close your eyes and rest the paddle across your knees, just floating. The soundscape of the floodplain surrounds you. Birds calling, frogs croaking, water lapping against wood. Somewhere nearby, a splash interrupts the calm, something large entering the water. You open your eyes slowly, expecting perhaps another hippo, but instead you see a cow wading chest deep, led by a farmer balancing on a narrow reed raft. He waves cheerfully as he passes. "Good grazing today," he calls. "The grass grows quick in the shallows." You return the wave, chuckling softly. "Just keep your cow away from the crocodiles." He laughs. "She's too stringy to bother with." The exchange leaves you smiling as you drift along. This strange half-water, half-land world has its dangers, yes, but it also feels alive in a way that dry seasons never do. Everything breathes together. Plants, animals, people, all bound by the same slow rhythm of rise and fall. After a while, you steer toward a small sandbar just visible above the surface. You beach the boat gently and step out, the warm silt squishing between your toes. The island is barely the size of your hut's floor, but it's yours for the moment, a little patch of solitude in a liquid world. You sit down, letting your fingers trail in the water. The current is gentle here, swirling lazily around your ankles. You watch tiny fish dart through the shallows, quick as thoughts. Dragonflies flit above them, their wings shimmering green and blue. For a moment, you imagine what it must look like from their eyes. This great river stretching out endlessly, dotted with reflections of sky and leaves. You find a reed stalk beside you, snap it open, and chew the sweet pith inside. It tastes faintly of sugar and water, the flavor of the Nile itself. As the afternoon wears on, you notice a movement among the reeds again. This time, it's a small bird with iridescent feathers, a kingfisher, perched motionless before it dives with a flash and emerges with a wriggling prize. The precision is mesmerizing. You laugh softly. "You probably won't survive this," you murmur to no one in particular, "if you're a fish." The thought drifts away on the breeze, mingling with the rustle of papyrus leaves. When you finally decide to head home, the light has turned amber. Long shadows stretch across the water, and the air cools just enough to carry the smell of night, moist earth, distant cooking fires, a faint trace of lotus blooming. As you paddle, you notice how the river has changed color again. Now a deep blue, flecked with red from the setting sun. The animals seem to sense the shift too. The birds gather in flocks, their cries echoing faintly, while the frogs grow louder, filling every gap in sound with their persistent chorus. You think about how much this rhythm defines your world. The river floods, life stirs, creatures return, then everything recedes again. Nothing lasts forever, but everything comes back. And maybe that's the quiet lesson of this place. Not to fight the current, but to flow with it. You paddle the final stretch in silence, letting the Nile do most of the work. The moon is just beginning to rise as you glide into the familiar bend near home. The crocodiles are gone, the ibis have vanished into the reeds, and the frogs are singing their endless lullaby. You pull the boat ashore and sit for a long time before going inside, watching as the moonlight ripples across the surface. The night insects hum like tiny bells. Somewhere, a hippo snorts once more in the distance, a deep, contented sound. You smile into the darkness. The river sleeps, but it dreams loudly. The morning begins with bells, small bronze ones that hang from the temple gate, jingling softly in the breeze. The sound travels across the water, delicate and precise, like sunlight breaking into pieces. You know that tone well. It means the priests are preparing for the offering. You rise, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and look toward the eastern bank. The temple there gleams faintly in the first rays of dawn, its limestone facade tinted with gold. Columns rise like reeds carved from light itself. Smoke already drifts upward from censers, curling lazily into the pink sky. The flood season might bring rest from labor, but it also brings devotion. Every family, every farmer, every scribe, everyone owes the river thanks. It's not written law, it's older than law. You pick up a small woven basket prepared the night before, 2 loaves of barley bread, a few lotus flowers, and a small jar of beer sealed with clay. The offerings aren't grand, but sincerity weighs more than wealth in the eyes of Hapi, the god of the Nile's bounty. The air is still cool as you make your way to the riverbank. A few others are doing the same, walking quietly, their baskets balanced on their heads. Some murmur prayers under their breath. Others simply hum softly, the kind of tunes passed down through families. You untie your papyrus boat, the ropes damp from the night dew, and push off. The water is calm this morning, reflecting the pale blush of sunrise. Each paddle stroke sends ripples across the mirrored sky. As you approach the temple landing, the sound of chanting grows stronger. The priests stand in a line along the causeway, their linen robes white as uncut shells, their heads shaven smooth. They move in slow, deliberate synchrony, graceful, almost hypnotic. The rhythmic beat of a sistrum, that metallic rattle sacred to the goddess Hathor, punctuates the chanting like a heartbeat. You step ashore and fall into line with the others. Everyone carries their offerings with reverence, eyes cast slightly downward, not out of fear, but focus. The steps up to the temple are damp underfoot, each one carved with faint hieroglyphs that tell stories of floods past, of gods appeased, of people thankful. At the top stands the high priest, his voice calm and measured as he recites the morning hymn. Hapi comes from the caverns, bringing life to the two lands. The fields laugh, the people rejoice, and the hearts of men are glad. The words roll like waves, each phrase washing over you, soaking into your mind. You've heard the hymn countless times, but it never loses its quiet beauty. When it's your turn, you place your basket on the offering table. The priest sprinkles a few drops of sacred water from the Nile onto the loaves, murmuring blessings you can barely catch. The water glistens briefly in the sunlight before sinking into the bread's crust. "May your household be full," the priest says softly. "May the river remember your name." You bow your head in thanks. "And may the flood be kind," you reply, the traditional answer. The priest smiles faintly, perhaps amused by your simple sincerity, then moves on to the next worshiper. After your offering, you step aside and watch the ceremony continue. The temple courtyard fills with the gentle murmur of voices, the scent of incense, frankincense and myrrh, blending with the natural aroma of river and lotus. It's an intoxicating mix, the sacred and the earthly mingling freely. At one side of the courtyard, a group of young novices are sweeping the stone floor with palm branches, their faces serious with concentration. They look far too small for the weight of ritual, yet their movements are perfect. A scribe nearby records every offering, dipping his reed pen into a small pot of ink and writing in quick, graceful strokes. You can't help but notice the debate breaking out near the altar, a quiet one, but animated. Two older priests seem to disagree over the proper order of verses. You catch fragments as you pass. It's first the hymn of overflow, then the chant of renewal. No, the hymn follows the blessing of silt as written in the old tablets. You smile slightly. Even among those who speak for the gods, there's room for argument. Historians still argue whether the priest's rituals were born of devotion or calculation, but you suspect the answer, like most truths, lies somewhere in the middle. After the ceremony, you wander to the temple's outer courtyard, where the common folk gather to socialize. Someone plays a slow tune on a double pipe flute, its notes fluttering like dragonflies. Merchants spread their wares, small amulets of faience shaped like crocodiles, fish, and lotuses, each meant to bring protection during the floods. A woman offers you one for a single copper deben. "For luck on the water," she says, pressing the tiny green charm into your palm. You inspect it. A little crocodile, perfectly carved, its grin wide and oddly friendly. You laugh softly. "Luck and teeth," you say. "A good combination." The woman chuckles. "They go together more often than you think." You slip the charm onto a cord around your neck and thank her. From your spot by the wall, you watch as people continue to arrive, their boats bumping gently against the temple's landing. Children chase each other between the columns, their laughter echoing faintly against the stone. Somewhere above, pigeons flutter and coo. The atmosphere feels lighter now that the offerings are complete. The priests have retreated inside, the chanting has faded, and the temple has shifted from sacred space to communal heart. You overhear bits of conversation, the kind that tells the pulse of everyday life. Someone complains about a neighbor's lazy ox. Another brags about a new clay roof. A third insists he saw the goddess Isis herself in a dream, and she told him to plant chickpeas instead of barley this year. You raise an eyebrow, but keep the thought to yourself. Dreams, after all, are their own kind of offering. As the morning stretches into afternoon, you step back onto your boat. The river waits, shining and wide, whispering softly against the hull. You take one last look at the temple. The white columns, the drifting incense, the sound of bells returning to the breeze, and push off. The current catches you gently, carrying you away from the shore. You trail your fingers in the water, feeling its coolness, its soft pull. Somewhere beneath the surface lies the reflection of everything you just witnessed. The bread, the prayers, the music, all dissolving back into the Nile's eternal memory. Halfway home, you pass a fisherman sitting cross-legged in his skiff, tossing small fish back into the water instead of keeping them. Curious, you call out, "Why throw away your catch?" He grins. "Offerings for Sobek," he replies. "Better to feed him than become his breakfast." You laugh. "Practical theology." "Exactly," he says, tossing another fish with a theatrical flourish. "Religion that swims both ways." The two of you share a laugh before parting ways, your boats drifting in opposite directions. As the sun begins to dip, the temple bells ring again, faint and distant, marking the close of the day's rituals. Their sound blends with the natural song of the river, and for a brief moment, it feels as though the world itself is humming in tune. You watch the light fade from the limestone walls, the gold turning to rose, then to the pale gray of twilight. You think about how the priests will continue their prayers even after dark, small flames flickering behind the temple's inner doors, smoke rising into the quiet. And you think about how, in its own way, every splash of an oar, every frog's croak, every whisper of wind through the papyrus is part of that same hymn. The Nile is the temple. The world is the ritual. You paddle home in silence, the faint ringing of bells still echoing in your mind, like the memory of a dream you don't want to wake from. The days after the temple ceremony drift by like the river itself, slow, steady, and strangely golden. The floodwaters are still high, spreading far across the flatlands until it's hard to tell where the Nile ends and the sky begins. You spend your mornings watching the water recede inch by inch, the familiar shapes of the land beginning to emerge once more. Mud banks rise like sleeping crocodiles, glistening in the sun. The tops of palms poke through the mist. The air smells of life, damp soil, new vegetation, and that faint sweetness of decay that means the earth is alive and hungry. You walk along the ridge near your house, balancing on the narrow strip of dry ground that separates water from home. A heron startles from a nearby reed bed, its wings catching the light as it glides silently away. Somewhere behind you, a frog croaks lazily, as if reminding you not to take the beauty too seriously. Down at the edge, you notice neighbors already testing the soil. They kneel, scoop up handfuls of dark mud, and roll it between their palms. The thicker it clings, the better it will be for the crops. One man smears a bit of it on his face like war paint and grins. "The flood was good this year," he says proudly. "The gods are pleased." You nod, and even though you don't fully understand the whims of the gods, you can't deny the feeling. The quiet, steady gratitude that hums beneath everything. Still, there's work to be done. The flood may be gentle, but it leaves behind chaos. Uprooted branches, tangled reeds, and small creatures that didn't make it through the current. You grab your wooden rake and begin clearing the area near your house, pulling debris into piles that will later be burned or composted. As you work, you notice something half buried in the mud. A small pot, its surface etched with faint lines. You kneel, brushing away the silt carefully, and realize it's old, very old. The clay is sun-faded, the rim chipped, but the craftsmanship unmistakable. You call over a neighbor, a man named Nefru, who knows a thing or two about pottery. He examines it with squinted eyes. "That's not from our time," he mutters. "Older. Maybe from when my grandfather's grandfather was young. Or older still," you suggest. Historians still argue whether the people before us made pottery like this, he says, rubbing his chin. Some say it came from the delta. Others think it floated here from some forgotten village. You turn the pot in your hands, imagining it once held grain or beer, or perhaps a small offering for a god whose name no one remembers now. It's strange how the Nile gives and takes, not just life, but memory. You set it on a rock to dry in the sun, a quiet relic of a life long gone. By midday, the heat grows thick enough to make the air shimmer. You retreat into the shade of your house, grateful for the cool interior. The walls, made of sun-baked mud brick, breathe faintly with the day's rhythm, absorbing heat, exhaling calm. You sip from a clay cup of slightly sour beer, the kind brewed locally and always tasting faintly of barley and thyme. Outside, you can hear laughter. Children playing on the dryer patches, sliding in the mud and pretending to be crocodiles. Their mothers shout warnings, but the laughter keeps rising, full of summer energy. After a while, a group of men pass by, pulling a small boat along the shallow water near the fields. They're part of the inspection team from the local official's household, the ones who mark the highest point of the flood on each property. Taxes depend on it, after all. You wave as they approach. The leader, a tall man with a scroll tucked under his arm, nods politely. "Good day," he says. "We're measuring the flood line. You'll be happy. It's a rich year." "Rich for the fields," you reply. "Maybe not for my purse." He chuckles. "The river is generous, but so are the collectors." You both laugh, the kind of laugh that hides a shared truth. He scribbles a note on his papyrus and moves on. Once they're gone, you head back to the fields to check the irrigation dikes. The system of canals and channels is the heartbeat of your life here. They're like veins stretching from the river to every patch of fertile land. If one breaks, water could rush where it shouldn't, or fail to reach where it must. You walk along the embankment, prodding at the edges with a stick. The mud squishes under your sandals, but it holds firm. You spot a small crack and kneel to patch it with handfuls of wet clay. It's simple work, but deeply satisfying. You can almost feel the river responding, like patching a wound on a living body. Nearby, you hear two younger farmers arguing over the best time to plant. One insists the field should be seeded as soon as the water finishes draining. The other swears by waiting until the soil cracks just slightly. Historians still argue whether the ancient farmers had fixed calendars, you think to yourself with a wry grin, but maybe they just argued like these two. By late afternoon, you take a break by the water's edge. You sit watching small fish dart in the shallows and pull out a date cake wrapped in reed leaves. The sweetness fills your mouth, soft and grainy. You lean back, feeling the damp ground beneath your palms. Overhead, a flock of ibises fly in perfect formation, their white feathers gleaming. They circle once, then land gracefully near a cluster of lotus plants. You watch as one dips its beak delicately into the water, a ritual of its own. It reminds you of something the temple priest said once. The gods built the Nile not for worship, but for watching. In watching, we learn reverence. You didn't fully understand it then, but sitting here now, you think you do. Reverence doesn't always require words or rituals. Sometimes it's just this, the stillness of being present as the world breathes around you. The sun begins to dip low, turning the sky to honey and rose. The fields shimmer with reflection, every puddle catching the color of fire. In the distance, you hear the slow, rhythmic thud of an ox's hooves as someone starts turning the soil where the flood has just withdrawn. The sound feels ancient, older than speech. You pick up the old pot again, now dry and warm from the sun. Its surface feels smooth where the silt has been brushed away, but the faint ridges of fingerprints remain, the maker's hands preserved in clay. You wonder what they were thinking when they made it. Were they also watching the flood recede? Were they tired, hopeful, full of quiet plans? You turn it over one last time and set it on your porch beside your door, where it catches the fading light. Maybe it's a reminder that everything, no matter how small, finds its way back to the surface eventually. As twilight deepens, the frogs start their chorus again, low, steady, endless. The sound blends with the rustling of papyrus, the whisper of wind, the heartbeat of a world still half underwater and half reborn. You breathe it all in, the scent, the warmth, the hum of life continuing as it always has. You smile to yourself and whisper softly, the flood has left its gift. And in that simple truth, the whole valley seems to nod in agreement. The morning air is cooler than yesterday, carrying a faint tang of silt and vegetation. You rise early, still smelling the lingering dampness of the Nile's retreating waters, and step onto the narrow path that winds along the edge of your small plot of land. The floodplain stretches wide before you, a patchwork of glistening puddles and dark, fertile soil. Every step sinks slightly into the soft earth, and you feel the slow pulse of the land under your feet. By now, the river has begun to carve its own channels through the floodplain, leaving tiny streams that wind like silver ribbons through the dark mud. You follow one, paddling your small papyrus boat where the water is deep enough. The current is gentle but persistent, carrying you smoothly along as you drift past familiar landmarks now partially submerged. The stub of a fence, the top of a mud brick granary, and the lone palm that always leans toward the water as if trying to see its reflection. A fisherman ahead waves to you, his net dangling lazily over the side of his skiff. "Plenty of fish this morning," he calls, grinning. You nod in acknowledgement, your own mind half on the water, half on the fields that await tending once the boat ride is over. The river has a way of slowing your thoughts. You notice the details you would otherwise miss. The sheen of a water beetle skimming the surface, the way sunlight hits a patch of lotus flowers so that they glow like tiny lanterns, and the faint buzzing of insects that hover lazily in the heat. Even the crocodiles, lurking beneath the water's surface unseen, seem a quiet, dignified presence. You remember the boy's warning from days ago about them and chuckle softly. They're part of the rhythm now, more shadow than threat. You guide your boat toward a small mound that has risen above the floodwaters. On the path, women are already at work, pulling up reeds to make mats and small baskets. Their hands are fast and practiced, weaving with a rhythm that feels older than the flood itself. One of them glances at you and smiles. "The river is generous this year," she says, lifting a bundle of fresh reeds. "Too generous," you reply lightly, gesturing at the mud that clings to every visible surface. "My feet may never dry." She laughs. Better wet than empty. And perhaps she's right. The flood brings discomfort, yes, but it also brings fertility, life, and stories. Stories you can feel in the thick, black earth beneath your sandals. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians saw the floods as entirely divine or partly practical. But standing here, watching the way water transforms the land, it seems impossible to separate one from the other. You push off again, gliding across a shallow pool where small fish flash like silver sparks beneath the water. A turtle pops its head above the surface, blinking at you with sleepy curiosity before slipping back into the depths. The calm is mesmerizing. It's as though the river has paused just long enough for you to catch your breath, to notice that the world is not only alive, but awake in every minute detail. By midday, the sun climbs higher, and the reflection of light off the water becomes almost blinding. You steer toward a small cluster of houses on the far bank, known for their granaries and carefully tended plots. You've come to assist them with checking the irrigation channels, ensuring that the receding flood hasn't damaged the delicate dikes that guide water to their fields. The owner, an older man with a wide-brimmed straw hat, greets you warmly. "Thank the river you're here," he says. "I can't reach the far end alone. The mud is treacherous, and the dikes are already weak from the last wave." You kneel beside him and inspect the earthen walls. The mud, still damp in places, holds firm, but you find small cracks along the top. With careful hands, you scoop wet soil and press it into the gaps, patting it smooth. The work is slow, almost meditative. Each patch feels like a tiny reassurance, a quiet promise that the water will flow where it should and the fields will thrive. Nearby, a young boy watches you, wide-eyed. "How do you know where to put it?" he asks, curiosity shading his voice. "Experience," you reply, smiling, "and the river tells you if you listen closely enough." He frowns thoughtfully, as though the answer is both satisfying and impossible to understand fully. You pat him on the shoulder and return to the task. Once the dikes are repaired, you step back to admire the work. The channels look orderly now, lined and ready to carry water efficiently to the waiting fields. You can almost see the future growth, tiny shoots of wheat and barley lifting from the fertile soil, bending toward the sun. As you rise, a sudden splash draws your attention. A young heron has landed nearby, catching a small fish in its beak. The precision is startling. Beak closes, fish flickers once, and the hunt is done. You laugh softly. "You probably won't survive this," you murmur, remembering the boy's crocodile warning. But it's impressive how some do. By mid-afternoon, the sun's heat drives you to seek shade. You rest under a tamarisk tree, its roots sunk deep in the rich soil. From here, you can see the entire expanse of the floodplain, gleaming water, islands of crops, and the small boats drifting lazily along channels. The scene is hypnotic, a perfect blend of chaos and order. The sounds of daily life carry across the water. A woman scolds a child for chasing ducks into the flood, the child's laughter blending with the quacking. Someone hammers a wooden door, and the hollow thump echoes across the open plain. Somewhere, a priest recites a quiet prayer, his voice barely audible over the gentle lap of water. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the symphony of the flood settle into your chest. It's a lullaby of sorts, a steady reminder that life persists even when the world feels submerged and uncertain. Eventually, you rise, dusting mud from your clothes. You retrieve your boat and push off, letting the river guide you back toward your own home. The water is warmer now, reflecting the late afternoon sky in deep shades of gold and copper. You notice tiny fish darting beneath the surface, and for a fleeting moment, you imagine each one as a small miracle, a creature surviving the flood, thriving in a temporary world of water. The journey back is quiet, the slow current carrying your thoughts as gently as your boat. You think of the heron, the boy watching you repair the dike, the villagers working tirelessly to restore their plots. The Nile, always generous, has given life, challenge, and beauty in equal measure. As evening falls, the air cools. The floodplain shimmers with reflected moonlight. You tie your boat to a post and stand for a moment, listening to the soft hum of water moving through channels, the distant croak of frogs, and the whisper of the wind in papyrus reeds. Everything seems aligned, a perfect rhythm of life. You turn toward home, the scent of cooking fires drifting through the evening air. The sound of children's laughter fades into the background as night settles over the village. You walk slowly, savoring the day's simple victories and quiet moments, carrying the floodplain's rhythm in your chest like a secret lullaby. The dawn breaks gently, brushing pale gold across the floodplain, and you awaken with the soft reminder that the Nile never truly sleeps. The water glimmers in delicate streaks, like molten metal caught in the fingers of early light. The air carries the faint sweetness of wet earth and the subtle tang of river silt. It's quiet, almost deceptive, because beneath this calm, life is already stirring. You step outside, sandals sinking slightly into the soft mud, and take a slow breath. The flood season has begun to recede, but the land is still alive with movement. Insects hum lazily over small puddles, and dragonflies flit over the surface like shards of colored glass. Somewhere, a pair of ducks quack, skimming the shallow water in tandem. The river is a living rhythm, pulsing beneath your feet and whispering through the reeds. Today, you decide, is for exploring the temporary waterways created by the flood. You haul your papyrus boat to the water's edge, the familiar smell of pitch and reeds greeting you like an old friend. Each stroke of the paddle carries you deeper into this transient world, where houses appear as islands and familiar paths are now submerged rivers. You navigate carefully, eyes scanning for any unexpected dips or hidden logs beneath the water. A fisherman drifts by, his net trailing lightly in the current. "Morning," he calls, a friendly grin breaking his sun-weathered face. "The fish are particularly lively today." You nod, acknowledging him, and for a brief moment, it feels as if the river itself pauses to watch the dance of nets and paddles. Along the edge, children play in shallow pools, their laughter bouncing off the water like tiny bells. One of them waves a small wooden boat at you, proudly sending it floating downstream. You watch it bob and spin, imagining the tiny captain at its helm, and can't help smiling. "You probably won't survive this," you murmur softly, "but it's a good adventure nonetheless." Further along, you notice the remains of a collapsed dike. Mud has caved in, creating a small channel that diverts the water unpredictably. You kneel to examine it, imagining how the villagers will have to work together to repair it before the soil dries too hard to mold. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians relied entirely on priests to predict the floods, or whether practical knowledge was passed quietly among farmers. But standing here, it's clear that survival demands both. A sudden splash draws your attention, a crocodile surfacing just beyond the channel, its eyes gleaming like dark jewels. You pause, letting your heartbeat settle before continuing. This is a reminder: the Nile gives and it tests in equal measure. You tip your head slightly as if offering respect, and it sinks silently back beneath the mirrored surface. You steer toward a clump of papyrus reeds, now taller than you remember from previous floods. Their tips sway gracefully in the breeze, hiding the movement of small creatures beneath. Tiny fish leap occasionally, while birds perch among the stalks, their wings reflecting sunlight. You can see the delicate balance of this ecosystem, every plant, animal, and human moving together in a rhythm that is at once fragile and enduring. Paddling gently, you pass a patch of lotus flowers. Their large leaves ripple across the water, hiding bright blooms in shades of pink and white. You remember the priest from the temple mentioning that lotus symbolizes creation and rebirth. In this floodplain, the symbolism feels tangible. The flowers rising from water that was once land, thriving in the soft, nourishing mud. You drift past another small settlement. The houses, elevated slightly on earthen mounds, peak above the water. Women are already at work, weaving baskets and mats from reeds that the flood has left behind. Their hands move deftly, creating patterns that have been passed down for generations. One woman notices you and nods, her eyes bright with recognition. "The river favors those who respect it," she says. You smile. "And perhaps those who paddle too slowly to annoy it," you reply, your voice low, almost lost in the gentle hum of water. By midday, the sun climbs high, casting sparkling patterns across the water. The heat is thick but not unbearable, and you take the time to rest on a small sandbar that has emerged amid the receding waters. You step out of the boat, letting the mud squish between your toes, and sit down. Tiny fish dart around your feet, curious but cautious. You take a piece of flatbread from your bag and nibble quietly, watching the movement of life around you. A sudden sound draws your attention, a low, rolling call from a hippo in the distance. Its presence is both soothing and imposing, a reminder of the untamed elements that share this landscape with you. You watch it surface briefly, its rounded back cutting through the water like a small island, and then disappear again. The sound echoes across the floodplain, vibrating faintly in your chest. Nearby, a young boy navigates a small wooden raft, balancing a basket of reeds on his head. His careful, playful movements suggest both skill and delight in the freedom the flood provides. You imagine him grown, perhaps guiding his own fields with this intimate knowledge of water and soil. You stand and push the boat back into the deeper channel, letting the current carry you downstream. The water is now lower, revealing small islands of mud and debris. You see birds swoop down to catch fish in shallow pools, and the occasional turtle pops up, surveying the flooded world. The afternoon drifts toward evening, and the light softens into warm gold. The air cools, carrying the faint scent of cooking fires from distant villages. You paddle slowly, enjoying the last moments of daylight as the water turns shades of bronze and deep blue. The flood has begun its retreat, but its mark remains: fertile soil, scattered reeds, and a living mosaic of life restored and renewed. As you near your own bank, you see familiar shapes rising from the water: the mounds of your home, the partially submerged trees, the little granary peeking above the flood. You tie your boat to a post and step out, mud squelching beneath your feet. The day's journey is over, but the memory lingers: the gentle sway of the river, the patterns of life it carries, and the quiet thrill of moving through a world that is both familiar and transformed. The sun sets fully now, casting long shadows across the floodplain. Frogs begin their evening chorus, and a soft breeze ripples through the papyrus. You pause, listening, inhaling the scent of mud and water, and smile. The Nile has gifted another day of rhythm, of life, and of quiet wonder. The morning arrives with a gentle hush, the kind that makes the world seem half dream, half awake. The floodplain glimmers faintly under a pale sky, water still stretching farther than usual, but beginning its slow retreat. You step outside, inhaling the rich, earthy scent of wet soil mixed with river silt, and notice how the landscape has subtly transformed overnight. Small pools shimmer like glass, and every reed and papyrus stalk stands taller, heavy with dew. You make your way toward the river in bare feet, mud squishing softly beneath your toes. The water is calm here, almost reflective, disturbed only by the occasional darting fish or bobbing lotus leaf. A heron lifts off lazily nearby, its wings catching the soft morning light as it disappears across the floodplain. You smile quietly. These are the moments you live for, when the river seems to speak in whispers rather than roars. Deciding to explore a side channel, you push your papyrus boat into a narrow waterway formed by last night's tide. The channel winds between clusters of reeds and papyrus, so dense at points that you have to maneuver carefully. Tiny fish flit beneath the boat, glittering like polished stones. Somewhere above, a kingfisher perches briefly on a stalk, then dives with astonishing precision, surfacing moments later with a wriggling prize in its beak. You chuckle softly, imagining it lecturing the smaller fish. You probably won't survive this, but it's a good lesson. Along the bank, you notice traces of human activity. footprints half submerged, a basket abandoned in the mud, and a small pottery shard glinting in the sun. You pick it up, examining the faint decorative lines etched across its surface. It feels ancient, older than anything you can remember seeing before. Nefru, your neighbor, once mentioned that shards like this sometimes wash down from older villages long swallowed by the river. Historians still argue whether the materials were locally made or carried from distant settlements. But holding it in your hand, it seems alive with memory. You drift past a small grove of date palms, their roots partially submerged. Children have left tiny wooden boats among the roots, and you imagine them returning later to race them along the miniature channels the floodwater has carved. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks lazily, a deep, vibrating sound that mingles with the distant flap of bird wings. The world feels fully awake and yet so calm, as if the Nile itself has slowed to savor these quiet moments. Further along, you spot a cluster of villagers inspecting their fields. Some are kneeling, running hands through the rich mud to assess its readiness for planting. Others carry small baskets of seeds, discussing the timing of sowing and which grains the water has nourished best. One man laughs as he accidentally splashes his neighbor with mud. You chuckle quietly, recalling the playful, persistent humor that threads through life even in the midst of toil. You drift closer, curious about their methods. One farmer explains how they patch small cracks in the irrigation dikes using wet clay from the riverbanks. "It's a delicate balance," he says, lifting a handful of dark mud. "Too wet and it collapses. Too dry and the water seeps away." You nod thoughtfully, imagining generations of people perfecting this knowledge. It's practical, yes, but also instinctive, passed down through observation and patience. A sudden splash draws your attention. Another crocodile, this one larger than the one you glimpsed days ago. It floats silently near the reeds, half hidden, watching. You tip your head respectfully, whispering a quiet greeting, and it disappears with a slow, deliberate dive. The presence of these creatures is a constant reminder that the Nile is a shared world, one in which humans, animals, and water itself coexist, negotiating boundaries both physical and instinctual. You continue along the channel until you reach a small island, just large enough to stand on. You tie your boat to a submerged root and step out carefully, the soft mud yielding beneath your weight. Tiny fish dart around your ankles, and dragonflies hover above, their iridescent wings flashing in the morning sun. You breathe deeply, taking in the gentle chorus of frogs, birds, and water lapping softly against the roots. Here, in this small, temporary oasis, you pause to reflect. The flood has left its mark everywhere, shaping the land in subtle ways, carving channels, depositing silt, revealing small mounds of clay, and creating new homes for birds, fish, and insects. You remember the high priest's words from the temple. Hapi brings life to all who watch and listen. Standing here, you finally understand, not just intellectually, but fully, with every sense awake, the truth behind them. The afternoon stretches lazily. You wander along the shallow pools, gently pushing your boat along tiny channels that wind like veins through the wet landscape. Each movement sends ripples across the surface, catching sunlight and reflecting the sky in fragmented, glittering patterns. You watch small turtles surface briefly, blink, and disappear. Frogs leap from lily pad to lily pad, and tiny fish perform synchronized maneuvers that seem almost deliberate, a ballet orchestrated by the river itself. Eventually, you drift toward a village whose houses peak above the floodwater. Women are busy weaving mats from reeds collected at the edges of the channel, their hands moving with a rhythm learned from years of practice. Children laugh and splash near the shoreline, chasing one another through shallow pools. You watch quietly, smiling at the harmony between work and play, survival and enjoyment. By late afternoon, the sun dips lower, painting the floodplain in amber and rose. You push your boat back toward your home bank, feeling the current guiding you gently. Every ripple, every flicker of light, every soft rustle of reeds seems to whisper the same message. The Nile is alive, patient, and generous, offering both sustenance and quiet wonder. When you finally step onto familiar mud banks, your feet sink slightly, and you feel grounded again in the world you know so well. The flood is receding, but its presence remains in the softened earth, the scattered reeds, the lingering moisture, and the pulse of life that continues unabated. You pause for a moment, listening to the frogs' evening chorus and the distant coo of pigeons returning to roost. The day ends with a sense of quiet accomplishment. You have wandered the floodwaters, witnessed the dance of fish and birds, seen the interplay of human and divine effort, and felt the gentle, steady heartbeat of the Nile. You carry these memories with you, soft and warm, as you return to your home, the smell of mud and river water clinging faintly to your skin. Tonight, you know, the river sleeps lightly, dreaming of tomorrow's rise and fall, of small creatures, of children, of priests, and of farmers tending their fertile plots. And you too rest, holding the day in your chest like a precious, gentle secret. The morning begins with a quiet mist hovering over the floodplain, softening the edges of trees and mudflats until everything seems painted in watercolors. You step outside, feeling the familiar cool dampness cling to your skin, and notice how the Nile's retreat has begun to reveal small mounds and patches of fertile soil. The world is subtly transformed, the rhythm of life shifting in ways that are both deliberate and accidental. You carry your small papyrus boat to the river, noticing the delicate sheen of dew on each reed and papyrus stalk. The water is glassy, disturbed only by occasional fish breaking the surface, or a heron taking flight with its shadow skimming across the reflections. You push off, the oar slicing through the current smoothly, and let the river guide you along the newly formed channels. The sound of water lapping against the hull is soothing, like a whispered lullaby, and your thoughts drift as freely as your boat. Along the bank, you see villagers beginning their daily routines. One man is repairing a small mud brick wall, carefully smoothing the surface with his hands to patch the cracks left by the receding flood. Another tends to a small garden that was briefly submerged, gently lifting seedlings that have been partially washed over. Children run between pools, their laughter ringing across the water in pure, unmeasured notes. You watch them, smiling softly. "You probably won't survive this," you murmur to yourself, but the joy is worth the risk. As you drift past, you notice the intricate patterns left in the mud by creatures both large and small. Tiny footprints of birds run alongside the broader, heavier impressions of oxen. You kneel to examine a small track, perhaps made by a wildcat or a mongoose, and marvel at the detail, imagining the quiet life that thrives unseen beneath the surface. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians fully understood the ecosystem of the floodplain, but it seems clear that they observed it closely, learning from every subtle hint the land and water offered. You continue along a narrow channel, the banks thick with papyrus and reeds. Somewhere above, a kingfisher dives expertly into the water, emerging moments later with a small fish clutched in its beak. The precision of the act makes you pause, both impressed and slightly envious of its skill. Nature's choreography is flawless here, unlike anything you could orchestrate, and yet it coexists seamlessly with human effort. A small island rises ahead, partially submerged, but sturdy enough to support a few trees and the scattered remains of an old mud brick structure. You tie your boat and step onto the soft, damp soil. Tiny fish swirl in the shallow water around your ankles, and dragonflies hover above like living jewels. You notice a pottery shard half buried in the mud, etched with faded lines. Picking it up, you wonder who might have held it centuries ago, imagining hands much like yours brushing away silt and feeling the cool clay beneath their fingers. Nearby, a group of women are gathering reeds to weave mats and baskets, their movements rhythmic and precise. Each twist of reed and fold of palm leaf seems to echo the broader patterns of the flood, careful, patient, and necessary. One of them notices you and offers a small wave. "The river is generous this season," she says. You nod, acknowledging both the blessing and the labor that comes with it. You continue exploring, navigating channels that twist and fork unpredictably. Small fish scatter as your oar disturbs the water, and you laugh softly at their startled dance. In the distance, a crocodile slips silently beneath the surface, barely leaving a ripple. You tip your head in respect, recalling earlier warnings. The river's creatures, like the humans who share this land, navigate the waters with their own knowledge and patience. As the sun rises higher, you notice the subtle scent of lotus flowers mingling with the earthy aroma of mud and water. The blooms glow softly, reflecting sunlight in pale pink and white, a quiet testament to the life that flourishes even after temporary submersion. You pause for a moment, letting the scent fill your lungs, appreciating the delicate balance that the flood maintains between destruction and renewal. Further along, you spot a fisherman carefully tending his nets. He waves as you pass, and you wave back, exchanging the silent camaraderie of those who live closely with the water. His movements are deliberate, honed over years of experience, a quiet counterpoint to the wild, unpredictable patterns of the river. Historians still debate how much knowledge of fishing techniques was codified in texts versus passed orally from one generation to the next, but observing him, it seems both approaches exist in harmony. By midday, the heat begins to rise, softening the edges of the floodplain in a golden haze. You navigate toward a small, partially submerged granary, examining the mud that has coated its lower walls. The flood has brought nourishment, but it also leaves traces of its power in every damp brick and sodden floor. You step carefully, mindful of the mud that threatens to cling to your feet like a stubborn memory. You notice the high-pitched laughter of children echoing across the water. They're chasing each other through shallow pools, their bare feet slipping and splashing as they move. You pause to watch, smiling at their energy and the simple joy of navigating a world temporarily altered by water. The sound is infectious, and you find yourself humming along softly, a quiet companion to their playful chorus. As afternoon turns toward evening, you make your way back toward familiar channels. The sunlight shifts to warm amber, casting long reflections across the water. Tiny fish leap briefly, birds swoop and call, and frogs begin their evening chorus. The floodplain feels alive with small movements, each subtle and precise, each part of a rhythm that has continued for generations. Finally, you tie your boat to a familiar post and step onto the familiar mud bank of your home. The village smells of cooking fires and wet earth, a comforting blend that signals both home and survival. You pause, letting the day's journey settle in your chest, carrying with it the quiet knowledge of the river, its creatures, and the human lives intertwined with every ebb and flow. The Nile has offered another day of life, challenge, and subtle wonder. You breathe deeply, listening to the distant croak of frogs and the whisper of wind through papyrus reeds, knowing that tomorrow will bring its own adventures, its own quiet lessons, and its own fleeting moments of beauty. The morning light drifts softly across the floodplain, painting the shallow waters in shades of silver and pale gold. You step outside, feeling the cool dampness of the earth cling to your feet, and inhale the familiar mixture of mud, river silt, and early blooms. The Nile is quieter now, its pulse steady and calm after recent floods, yet it still holds a subtle energy, a slow rhythm that seems to move beneath everything: reeds, papyrus, fish, and human footsteps alike. You carry your small papyrus boat to the river's edge and push off, the familiar scent of pitch and wet reeds greeting you like an old friend. The water is smooth, reflecting the sky with perfect clarity, disturbed only by a fish breaking the surface or a bird skimming across in a flash of white. Each paddle stroke sends gentle ripples across the glassy surface, a subtle reminder of your presence in a landscape that is both ancient and alive. As you drift, you notice the subtle marks of human life along the banks. Tiny footprints in the mud, abandoned baskets, and small pottery shards hint at yesterday's activity or perhaps centuries-old traces carried along by the current. You pick up a small fragment of clay, noting the faded carvings etched into its surface. Holding it, you imagine the hands that once shaped it, the tiny life it contained in its original form. Historians still argue whether some of these artifacts were traded from distant regions or made locally, but in your hand, the distinction feels unimportant. A heron lifts off from a nearby patch of reeds, its wings slicing the morning light. You watch it glide gracefully, the shadows skimming across the reflective water. "You probably won't survive this," you whisper under your breath, but the dance is exquisite. Small fish scatter below as the bird passes, shimmering like tiny coins in motion. Further along, children play along the shallow edges of the floodplain. Their laughter floats over the water, bright and unmeasured, a sound that feels as old as the land itself. You pause to watch, noticing the rhythm in their movement, the way they leap, stumble, and laugh, navigating mud and water with a natural grace. A small wooden boat drifts past, guided by tiny hands. It wobbles dangerously, then rights itself, a miniature testament to persistence and balance. You navigate toward a small channel, recently carved by the receding floodwaters. Along its banks, women gather reeds to weave mats and baskets, their hands moving with steady precision. One of them waves at you, offering a brief smile and a nod. "The Nile has been generous," she says. You nod in return, aware of the quiet labor that sustains life here. Each action, each weave of reeds, mirrors the larger patterns of the river: patient, deliberate, necessary. A sudden splash draws your attention. A crocodile surfaces, its eyes glinting in the morning sun. You pause, respecting its space, and it disappears beneath the surface almost immediately. Living in the Nile's floodplain requires coexistence, a delicate understanding of both human and animal needs. This awareness is as vital as any tool or skill. You continue down the channel, passing an old mud brick granary partially revealed by the receding water. The walls are slick with residual silt, evidence of the flood's generosity and its challenge. You step carefully along the bank, noting how each grain of mud tells a story of water strength, human resilience, and the fragile balance that sustains life here. Small fish leap, creating concentric ripples that shimmer in the sunlight. Dragonflies hover above, their iridescent wings reflecting flashes of color, while frogs croak faintly from hidden pools. The floodplain feels alive, every small movement part of a larger, interwoven rhythm. You pause to appreciate it, letting the hum of water and life settle into your chest. Midday heat rises, softening the edges of the world into a gentle haze. You rest briefly on a mud bank, nibbling a small piece of bread wrapped in reed leaves. The scent of lotus flowers drifts faintly from nearby pools, mingling with the earthy aroma of wet soil. You watch the patterns in the water, the way it curls around small islands of mud, the reflections of trees and sky, the flicker of light across rippling surfaces. Villagers pass along the banks, checking fields and irrigation channels. One man waves, carrying a small bundle of reeds. You wave back, sharing a silent acknowledgement of the work and vigilance that the flood demands. Historians still debate whether such knowledge was fully codified or learned through careful observation. But watching these actions unfold, it's clear that experience and attentiveness guide survival. By late afternoon, the sky softens into shades of amber and rose. You guide your boat slowly back toward your home bank, allowing the gentle current to carry you. The floodwaters reflect the changing light, creating a sense of suspended time. Tiny fish leap here and there, and the occasional bird swoops low, its shadow flickering across the water. You tie your boat to the familiar post, stepping onto the soft mud with careful balance. The village smells of cooking fires, wet earth, and the faint sweetness of lotus blossoms. You pause, taking in the quiet harmony of the floodplain, the coexistence of humans, animals, and water, and the subtle lessons it offers: patience, attentiveness, and a deep respect for the forces that shape life. As evening falls, the frog's chorus begins anew, accompanied by the soft rustle of papyrus in the wind. You breathe deeply, absorbing the gentle rhythm, knowing that tomorrow will bring another day of subtle discoveries, quiet labor, and the endless ebb and flow of the Nile. You smile softly, grateful for the steady pulse of the river and the small, extraordinary moments it offers in every ripple, every croak, and every fleeting shimmer of light across the water. The morning arrives quietly, the floodplain bathed in soft, muted light. Water still lingers in pockets across the land, creating tiny, reflective pools that catch the early sun like scattered mirrors. You step outside, feeling the damp earth cling to your feet, and inhale deeply. The mix of silt, wet reeds, and faint lotus blossoms filling your senses. Today feels like a gentle farewell to the flood, a day to wander and observe before the river fully retreats. You carry your small papyrus boat to the water's edge, the familiar scent of pitch and reeds greeting you like an old friend. As you push off, the water glides smoothly beneath the hull, carrying you forward with almost imperceptible ease. Tiny fish scatter at your approach, and a kingfisher dives into a shallow pool, emerging with a wriggling prize. "You probably won't survive this," you murmur softly, but life persists beautifully anyway. The floodplain stretches wide, revealing patches of dark, fertile mud and scattered reeds. Children are already at play, their laughter ringing across the water, bright and unmeasured. Some chase small wooden boats, others splash through puddles, discovering temporary islands of discovery created by the flood. You drift past, smiling at their energy and freedom, noticing how even these brief floods leave a mark on life, both human and animal. Along the bank, women gather reeds, weaving them into mats and baskets. Each movement is deliberate, hands working with years of experience to shape and create. You nod at one woman, who waves, acknowledging both your presence and the shared understanding of living closely with the Nile. Historians still argue whether weaving patterns evolved purely from necessity or whether symbolic meanings were deliberately encoded. But watching the meticulous work, you sense both practicality and artistry intertwined. You navigate through a narrow channel where the water curls around small islands of mud, revealing half-submerged roots and the occasional pottery shard. Picking up a fragment, you study the etched patterns. The clay feels sun-warmed and smooth, its faint ridges carrying stories from centuries past. Nefru once suggested that many such shards were remnants of ancient settlements, perhaps washed downstream, yet the truth is uncertain. Holding it, you imagine the hands that shaped it, the lives it touched, and the quiet continuity connecting then and now. Further along, a crocodile glides just beneath the surface, eyes barely breaking the water. You pause, respecting its presence, and it disappears silently beneath the lily-covered pool. The river teems with life that moves on its own rhythm, independent yet intertwined with your own. Frogs croak faintly in the distance, insects hum lazily over the water, and birds hover above, swooping in synchronized arcs. The floodplain feels alive with subtle motion, each element part of an intricate, ongoing dance. By midday, the sun climbs higher, turning the water into molten light. You rest briefly on a small sandbar, letting your toes sink into the mud while nibbling on flatbread wrapped in reed leaves. The lotus flowers nearby float serenely, their blossoms reflecting sunlight like pale lanterns. You watch them, thinking of the priest's teachings and the symbolism they attributed to the flowers: creation, rebirth, and the enduring life of the Nile itself. Returning to the main channel, you see villagers tending their fields, repairing dikes, and assessing the fertile soil left behind by the receding water. Their movements are methodical and careful, evidence of the intimate knowledge of the river that has been honed over generations. You pause to help patch a small crack in a dike, feeling the dark mud yield beneath your hands. Each repair, each careful adjustment, ensures that water flows where it should and that the fields will flourish. As the afternoon stretches on, the floodplain shimmers under the golden light. Tiny fish leap, dragonflies hover, and the occasional bird swoops low across the water, their reflections dancing in tandem. You guide your boat slowly back toward your home, savoring the serene rhythm of the river, the gentle pulse that has carried life through days both ordinary and extraordinary. By the time you reach your familiar mudbank, the sun has dipped low, casting long reflections across the floodplain. You step out of the boat, mud squishing under your feet, and pause to take in the scene. The village smells of cooking fires, wet earth, and faint lotus blossoms. Children are running toward home, their laughter fading, while frogs and crickets begin their evening chorus. You breathe deeply, letting the rhythm of the Nile settle into your chest. Now, the flood has fully retreated, leaving fertile soil, scattered reeds, and the quiet marks of a season's passage. You sit for a moment on the riverbank, listening to the gentle hum of life, the soft rush of water through irrigation channels, the faint rustle of papyrus, and the distant calls of birds returning to roost. You watch the golden light fade, knowing that tomorrow the river will wake again, bringing new lessons, challenges, and quiet miracles. You lean back, closing your eyes, and allow the world to dissolve into gentle sounds and scents. The river's pulse, the chorus of frogs, the whispering reeds, they all lull you toward the calm certainty of night. The flood has passed, but its memory lingers in the fertile earth, in the small pottery shards, in the lives of children and villagers, and in the quiet rhythm of the water itself. And now, as the evening deepens and stars begin to flicker above, you let the Nile's gentle lullaby carry you, the river's life and yours woven together in soft, enduring harmony. The day fades slowly, each moment stretching longer, softer, and quieter than the last. The golden light of evening sinks into the land, leaving only shadows that move gently across the floodplain. You breathe in deeply, feeling the cool air mingle with the lingering warmth of sun-baked mud and river water. The world feels calm, settled, and safe, a living lullaby that hums in rhythm with your heartbeat. The villagers return to their homes, the children's laughter replaced by the soft rustle of evening chores and quiet conversations. Frogs and crickets take the stage, their chorus a steady, soothing cadence that blends with the faint whisper of wind through papyrus reeds. You watch the lotus flowers, their pale blossoms reflecting the dimming sky, and feel a sense of timelessness, the slow, patient pulse of the river carrying all life forward without rush or judgment. Even the old pottery shard in your hand seems to hum with memory, a reminder that the flood leaves more than fertile soil. It leaves stories, subtle traces, and the quiet presence of generations past. The Nile has given generously, shaping life with both challenge and care, teaching patience and respect in ways that words could never fully capture. You feel your body settle against the earth, your senses softening. The river, the reeds, the frogs, the birds all merge into a gentle current of sound and rhythm that rocks you softly toward rest. Every breath becomes slower, every thought more distant, like leaves carried gently downstream. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the river's lullaby carry you. The flood has passed, the day is complete, and the world is exactly as it should be, calm, nurturing, and quietly alive. You are part of it, just for a while, and the memory of the Nile's gentle rhythm will follow you into sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.